Why is a continent that's packed with the world's most valuable resources also home to some of the world's poorest people? It's a huge question, right? But what if the answer isn't about what Africa is missing, but about what's being taken from it? Today, we're not just going to ask the question, we're going to investigate the answer.
Okay, get this. Imagine you're holding a lottery ticket worth $2.5 trillion. Just try to picture that number. Well, that's the estimated value of the mineral wealth just sitting under the soil of the African continent. It's a truly mind-boggling amount of money.
You have the cobalt for every smartphone, yet your children go hungry. Wow. This quote just cuts right to the heart of the whole paradox, doesn't it? I mean, how can the very source of the materials that power our entire modern world see so little of the actual benefit? Well, let's follow the money and find out.
To find the real answer, we need to step away from the usual stories about foreign aid and corruption. Instead, welcome to what we're calling the crime scene of global finance. We're going to treat this whole thing like a proper investigation.
And you know, in any good investigation, you gotta follow the evidence. So we've got 3 key exhibits on the docket for you today, and each one is gonna expose a different piece of what really can only be described as a massive global heist. So let's start with Exhibit A, the heist. Now, this isn't your typical smash and grab job. Nope, this is a really sophisticated financial trick known as transfer pricing.
So what is it? Well, to put it simply, it's a completely legal way for huge companies to play a kind of shell game with their profits. They move money between different branches of their own company all over the world to make absolutely sure they pay as little tax as possible.
Okay, so how does this heist actually work? Let's walk through it. First, a company pulls valuable resources, let's say cobalt, out of the ground in an African nation. But instead of selling it for what it's actually worth, they sell it for a ridiculously low price to their own sister company in a tax haven. Then, that company in the tax haven turns around and sells the cobalt at the real high market price. So, the massive profit? It's not recorded in Africa, where all the work was done. Nope, it's recorded in the tax haven, where the tax bill is basically zero. And just like that, billions in taxable income just vanishes from the country it came from.
All right, let's move on to Exhibit B. We're calling this one the leash. We're talking about a currency system called the CFA franc, which some have called a kind of structural economic straitjacket.
The CFA franc is a currency used by 14 different nations in Africa. Now, the crucial part is that it's tied to the euro, and for decades, it was guaranteed by France. The idea was to create some monetary stability, but, and this is a big but, here's the catch. As part of that deal, these nations had to keep 50% of their foreign currency reserves parked in the French treasury.
Just think about what that means for a country, to not have full control over its own money. If you have your own sovereign currency, you can set your own interest rates, you can manage your reserves. But under the CFA franc system, all that control is basically outsourced. Your economic policy is tied to the European Central Bank, and a giant chunk of your nation's wealth is physically held in another country. It puts a fundamental limit on your own economic freedom.
And that brings us to our final piece of evidence, Exhibit C, the paradox. And for this one, let's look at something we all know and love, chocolate, to see how value gets extracted right out in the open.
Just look at this breakdown of where the money goes from a single chocolate bar. It's wild. West Africa produces about 70% of the world's cocoa, the main ingredient. But the farmers who do all the back-breaking work, they get just 6% of the final price, a tiny fraction. The vast majority of the wealth, a whopping 80%, is captured by the big manufacturers and retailers who are mostly based in the West. So the countries growing the stuff get pennies, while the countries processing and selling it get the dollars.
You know, these things aren't exactly secrets, but they often stay buried in these super dense, boring reports that nobody ever reads. Our goal here is to drag these truths out into the light. And if you find this kind of investigation valuable, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next.
So, after looking at all the evidence, the heist of transfer pricing, the leash of the CFA franc, and the paradox of the chocolate box, it is time for the final verdict. And really, it's time to completely reframe the entire narrative.
Africa is not relying on the world's charity. The world is relying on Africa's charity. Let that just sink in for a second. The evidence we've seen suggests the whole story we're told is completely backward. This isn't about a poor continent that needs our help. It's about a rich continent whose wealth is being systematically drained to benefit the rest of the world.
And all of this brings us to a really fundamental question at the heart of our investigation.
After seeing how things like transfer pricing actually work, what do you think? Should tax havens be illegal? It's a massive global debate, and I want to know what you think. Let's get into it in the comments.